The idea here is that the cervical spine and cranium are positioned in a non-neutral position, such as rotation, flexion or extension, and/or side flexion. A common pattern that hockey players present with is known as forward head posture. With optimal posture, the face and eyes would be oriented straight ahead, with the spine tall and the player's ears positioned directly over their shoulders. In this position, the head is well supported by the spine, which minimizes the necessity for any compensatory muscle contraction. Now, forward head posture refers to any position whereby the head is positioned in front of the spine. In other words, if you drew a vertical line straight through the player's ears and down to the ground, it would pass in front of the player's shoulders. Forward head posture is almost entirely self-inflicted. Tom Myers, who's an anatomy expert, once said, "Gesture becomes habit, habit becomes posture, posture becomes structure." So when hockey players sit in front of their computer, on their couch, or in their cars and they're slumped forward a bit, they're teaching their body to bias toward forward head posture. The skating position requires a forward head posture too. Then the players get off the ice and sit on the bench with a forward head posture, then get off the ice and hop on an exercise bike and typically watch the TV, which is positioned above their head, which also requires a forward head posture. In other words, the overwhelming majority of the postures they hold throughout the day, both in their daily living and in their sport, drive them into this position. So at this point, you may be wondering why this matters. For starters, this position is typically related to a number of other postural dysfunctions. But most relevant to the concussion discussion, having a forward head posture causes altered position and function of the muscles surrounding the head and neck. As with all muscles in the body, function is largely dictated by position. So if the muscle is positioned improperly, their role in causing and controlling movement changes. In this case, the position will not only cause excessive tension across the head and neck, but it also necessitates that the muscles are under constant tension to hold the head up, meaning these muscles never really get an opportunity to shut off and relax. It also means they're poorly positioned to control movement of the head, which could also result from direct impact or impact to the body that causes a whiplash-like effect to the head. Remember that soft tissue damage in this area was one of the potential causes of concussion-like symptoms, so positioning the head in a way that is going to cause unnecessary and dysfunctional stress across these areas is certainly not ideal. Also, when the head is positioned in front of the spine, it undergoes a motion known as posterior cranial rotation to help position the eyes straight ahead. If the head is positioned in front of the spine and the head does not undergo this posterior rotation, then the face and eyes would be oriented downward toward the floor. Naturally, being able to see is important, so our body compensates by rotating the head backward to position the face and eyes straight ahead. You can see this in the three pictures. In the first picture, you can see that the ears are aligned above the shoulders and that the face and eyes are positioned forward. In the next one, the head is positioned in front of the shoulders, but the head doesn't rotate on the spine, so the face and eyes are positioned down. And then in the final picture, the head is still positioned in front of the shoulders, but now the head is rotated back to position the face and eyes straight ahead. This posterior cranial rotation places more stress across the occipital nerves, which exit the spine in this area. It also makes the head more likely to impinge on these nerves as a result of contact. Remember, impingement of these nerves is a cause of concussion-like symptoms. So this is another mechanism through which these symptoms can arise as a result of contact that aren't necessarily caused by a brain injury. These positions also have a profound effect on the visual system. The eyes are an incredibly powerful source of information to the body about where it is in space and what's going on around it. When people think about eye function, typically all they're concerned about is 20/20 vision, but the position of the eyes has the power to upregulate or downregulate muscle activity throughout the entire body. For example, if you look down, the activity of your flexors will upregulate. If you look up, the activity of your extensors will upregulate. And if you look left and right, the activity in the muscles that assist with left and right rotation will upregulate. In this way, your eyes help drive more efficient movement. Your body responds to the direction you're looking in by upregulating activity in the muscles that will help you move there. This is largely governed by the position of the eyes in the socket. In other words, think of the eyes as a joint. In this case, you can think of it as a ball and socket joint. In order to change position, you can have the eye or the ball move in the socket, or you can have the socket move around the eye. So if the eyes continue to look straight ahead, but the head rotates in any direction, the position of the eye within the socket is changed, and so too is the message sent to the rest of the body. Take a look at the three pictures here and see what you notice. In the first picture, the head is positioned in a neutral position, but the eyes are looking down and to the left. In the second, the head is in a forward head posture, in a position of posterior cranial rotation, and the eyes are looking to the left. In the third, the head is still in a position of posterior cranial rotation and now has rotated to the right and the eyes are looking straight ahead. But in all of these pictures, as a result of the eye moving within the socket and the socket moving around the eyes are positioned down and to the left within the socket. Very much related to this last point is the idea that the visual system can have deficiencies beyond 20/20 vision. In fact, the story of how 20/20 came about as a measure is pretty interesting. In an article titled The Amazing Truth of 20/20 Eyesight, which is available at visionhelp.com, Dr. Barry Tannen says that in 1862, a man named Snellen devised a testing system to determine people's eyesight. He asked people to stand at 20 feet and through experimentation discovered the smallest size letter that most people with good eyesight could see. He called this size 20 letter and the vision was recorded as 20/20. At the time it was thought that this was all you needed in the way of vision, and while this was certainly a step in the right direction, 150 years later our understanding of the visual system has evolved substantially, but the testing that most players undergo has not. There are other qualities in addition to 20/20 that need to be assessed. These include, among other things, tracking, which is the ability to move the eyes smoothly and accurately in tandem to follow something, accommodation, or the ability to switch back and forth between near and far objects, binocularity, the ability to use both eyes together equally in a coordinated fashion, and finally, visual motor integration, which simply refers to the ability to integrate visual and motor systems, an example of which is hand-eye coordination. All of these components are incredibly important in maximizing performance, but deficiencies in any of these areas can also cause any number of concussion-like symptoms. Also, as I mentioned earlier, the visual system shapes the body's interpretation of the world around it. If the visual system is asymmetrical, torqued, or otherwise deficient, it's inevitable that the player's musculoskeletal system and movement tendencies will be too. This is a commonly overlooked underlying factor in many hockey injuries, especially with players that always seem to be getting hurt, and it can even affect academic performance. A foundational concept throughout this discussion has been the idea of asymmetrical positioning. In this regard, I've been very heavily influenced by the Postural Restoration Institute. PRI explains that our anatomy is inherently asymmetrical. As a few examples of this, we have a liver on the right, not on the left. We have heart tissue on the left, but not on the right. Our diaphragm is significantly larger on the right than the left, and we have 3 lobes of lung on the right, but only 2 on the left. We also have asymmetrical neurological systems and relatively predictable asymmetrical movement tendencies. These things in combination lead to a number of other changes throughout the body that are both objectively prevalent and relatively predictable. PRI describes these adaptations as being stuck in specific patterns at the lumbopelvic, thoracic, and or cervico-cranial regions, all of which can be identified with a handful of simple screens. If someone gets stuck in a certain pattern of asymmetry, it can feed patterns above and below it. For example, an individual may be stuck in a certain hip position or pattern, and this will influence everything down to the feet and everything up to the head. Related to concussions, the patterns that PRI identifies can feed up to create an asymmetrical or torqued position of the cervical and cranial bones, which will influence both the resiliency to change in position or movement in this area and the positioning of and stress across the eyes. In other words, a visual problem may drive problems down the chain, as I mentioned earlier, or a hip pattern may feed up the body and create an asymmetrical cranial orientation, which can cause visual problems. This can get pretty complex, but the idea is, at least conceptually, pretty simple. Symptoms at the head could have underlying causes or predispositions located in other regions of the body, which will also need to be acknowledged and, when appropriate, treated in order to move the player further from symptom threshold and closer to optimal. The last concept I want to touch on is threat perception. The human body is constantly in a state of flux, altering the activity of its various systems to accommodate the demands placed on it. This is largely governed by the autonomic nervous system, or ANS. There are two branches of the ANS, known as your sympathetic and parasympathetic systems. The sympathetic system can be thought of as your fight or flight system. The classic example is if you came face to face with a hungry tiger, your sympathetic system would upregulate to prime the body for action. After you've escaped the threat of the tiger and are in a safe place, the parasympathetic system facilitates a return to more baseline levels. This is a drastically oversimplified look at these two systems, but the general idea is that they work in harmony to respond to the demands placed on the body. Following pain or injury, the body's threat perception may be increased. In other words, the body shifts towards a more sympathetic state, even though there may not be a real threat. This can have a profound effect in a number of different areas, one of which is soft tissue tension. I've learned a great deal on this topic from my friend Patrick Ward, who is both a strength coach and manual therapist. If you don't already, I would encourage you to check his site out, which is OptimumSportsPerformance.com. In this case, the body perceiving a threat causes increased tension in muscles and other connective tissue that can augment concussion-like symptoms. When you hear stories about a player's concussion symptoms completely going away following a massage, this is usually why. Massage stimulates a shift toward a more parasympathetic state, which decreases the body's threat perception and reduces tension globally. Massage is a great option for hockey players anyway, just to help balance the constant sympathetic stimulus associated with training practices and competition, but it's especially relevant in these circumstances.